Hello everyone, my name is Ramya Shastri and I work as an enterprise agile coach. I welcome all to today's video on sprint planning. Whether you are new to agile or a seasoned practitioner, sprint planning is a critical process that plays a vital role in success of any project or a product. In this video, we will delve into the world of sprint planning and explore its significance in the agile and Scrum framework specifically. We will discuss what sprint planning is, why it's important, and how it helps team deliver value to the customer. So let's begin. So first let's talk about the introduction of sprint planning. Basically, what is sprint planning? Sprint planning is the most crucial event of Scrum framework. By outlining the work to be completed during the sprint planning kicks off the sprint. The collective effort of the whole Scrum team go towards creating the plan. The product owner makes sure everyone is ready to address the most crucial things on the product backlog and how they relate to the product goal. The product owner, the Scrum Master, and developers together participate in the sprint planning. So these are the participants. But in order to get input, the Scrum team may also invite other people outside the Scrum team to the sprint planning. Meaning, if the Scrum team feels that the other people outside the Scrum team have got some inputs to the sprint planning, like stakeholders or the management or any other person, they can invite them to the sprint planning and they can contribute to the sprint planning as well. Now let's talk about the time duration, cadence, and etc. So the Scrum Guide says that for 1 month of sprint, the sprint planning is time boxed to maximum of 8 hours, which means that for sprint length of 1 month, the maximum time limit of sprint planning is 8 hours. The event is often shorter for sprints that are shorter, which means if your sprint length is anywhere between 1 to 3 weeks, then the maximum time limit that still you can have is only 8 hours for your sprint planning. You cannot extend your sprint planning beyond 8 hours. Now that we understand the participants, the cadence, and the importance of sprint planning, now let's move further. Now let's understand what is the purpose of sprint planning. Why do we even do sprint planning, or what we do in sprint planning, right? The purpose of sprint planning is to identify why is the sprint valuable, what can be done in this sprint, and how the chosen work can be done. So now let's talk about all of these things in detail. In sprint planning, as I mentioned, this is the agenda to discuss why, what, and how, right? The, Now let's talk about why the sprint is valuable. The product owner proposes how the product could increase its value and utility in the current sprint. The whole Scrum team then collaborates to define the sprint goal that communicates why the sprint is valuable to the stakeholders, which means the sprint goal gives the answer to why the sprint is valuable. And where the sprint goal is coming from? The sprint goal is the subset of the product goal, which means the product goal is broken down into multiple sprint goals. And for the current sprint, a sprint goal is identified, and this sprint goal answers why this sprint is valuable. Now, sprint goal must be finalized prior to the end of the sprint planning. Towards the end of the sprint planning, the sprint goal must be identified by the Scrum team. Now, let's talk about what can be done in this sprint. Through the discussion with the product owner, the developers select items from the product backlog to include it in the current sprint. The Scrum team may refine these items during this process, which increases understanding and confidence. Now, what do I mean by refining? The Scrum team, that is the developers, Scrum Master, and the product owner, discusses each work item and clarifies any doubt that they may have, and breaks the work item, the product backlog items into the smaller work items, and they discuss each of these smaller work items, and by this they get confidence on what that item is, right? So this is what happens in what can be done in the sprint. Selecting how much can be completed in the sprint may be very challenging. Why am I saying very challenging? Because we cannot predict really what we are going to how much we are going to pick up, because each sprint, your sprint goal is also changing, and with the sprint goal your prediction will also go haywire. And why do I say that? Because you cannot predict the complexity and unknowns within the sprint beforehand, and that is the reason why it is very challenging to select how much a work can be completed. However, the more the developers know about their past performance, their upcoming capacity, and their definition of done, the more confidence they will be in their sprint forecasts. That means the more they clear on their upcoming capacity, their past performance, and definition of done, they become more confident in coming closer to the forecasting or prediction. Now, let's discuss how will the chosen work get done. For each selected product backlog item, the developers plan the work necessary to create an increment that meets the definition of done. The developers create the plan. It's not the Scrum Master, not the project owner, not the product owner, or not the project manager. It's the developers create the plan that is required to get the work done. This is often done by decomposing the product backlog items into smaller work items of 1 day or less. As I mentioned earlier, the product backlog items are broken down into smaller work items. How small they can be? That small which can be get done in a single day or even in a lesser time. The work item should be that small enough. Now, when I say small work items, you may ask me, what where is the place for user stories in this entire thing, right? So now the smaller work items are usually referred as user stories. Remember that in Scrum there is nothing called as user stories. User stories is the complementary practice that we have adapted from different frameworks, right? So the work items as per Scrum, it's the product backlog items, and smaller work items, this product backlog item are brought into the sprint backlog. So that's what the Scrum guide says. But as we all know, Scrum is a lightweight framework, and we can adapt other practices. So we have adapted other practices of defining our work item into epic, features, user story, and whatever that you may want to call. So within the sprint backlog, we have user stories. So the big product backlog work items are broken down into smaller work items called as user stories. How this is done is at the sole discretion of the developers. As I mentioned, no one can dictate or tell the developer how that can be done. How to turn the product backlog items into increments of value, that is left up to the developers. Now let's move on to further. Now, up till now, what we have learned is what is sprint planning, what is its important, who are the participants, what is the time frame for sprint planning, what is the purpose, that means what we do in the sprint planning. Now let's see what is the sprint planning process like, how the process of a sprint planning goes. Now, in the sprint planning process, what we'll talk about is the sprint goal, the flexible plan, and prioritizing the product backlog items and breaking down the work items into smaller work items. In order to provide the most value to the customers, sprint planning strives to align the developers, and the product owner on what to create next. The product owner begins by highlighting the team's product goal and introducing the sprint's main goal. The Scrum team then works together to develop the sprint goal, taking into account who is available. That means the capacity, basically. The developers then choose the necessary items from the product backlog and move them to the sprint backlog to predict the work necessary to complete the sprint goal. The developers must also come with a plan for achieving their projections. In sprint planning, the developers also must identify the dependencies and highlight them in the sprint planning meeting so that it becomes transparent to everyone. That means all the impediments or dependencies should be highlighted in the sprint planning to make it transparent. Why we need that transparency? Because Scrum is built on empirical process. Now let's discuss about the importance of sprint goal. Finding the value of the upcoming sprint is the most crucial part of the sprint planning event. That's what we have talked about so far. The sprint goal outlines the total benefit that the sprint will bring to the product goal. As I mentioned earlier, your sprint goal is determined from your product goal. Now, but if you are trying to achieve the sprint goal, that means you are trying to achieve or get closer to the product goal. You know what? As a agile coach, I have spoken with a lot of Scrum teams that don't always define goal for each sprint. By doing this, they are losing out on the team's increased attention, right? So if they do not define the goal, they are not they do not have a focus or a direction to which they are leading to, right? Consider a Scrum team plans to pick up few backlog items. Okay. During the middle of the sprint, they realize that they won't be able to deliver all of them. They will now have to narrow the scope of the sprint. However, which PBIs should be prioritized above others? Making this choice is challenging without having a clear sprint goal. Now, imagine now you're just working on a pace in a sprint, and middle of the sprint, you realize that you know what, we are not able to deliver all the work items. Now you have to remove something from the sprint backlog. Now, which are the things that you're going to remove? How which item are you going to prioritize from the other one over other item? How are you going to make a choice if you don't know what is that goal that you're trying to achieve, or what is the goal that you're committing to as a developer, right? Further, the sprint goal acknowledges that we cannot know or forecast what will occur during the sprint due to the complexity of the environment. As I mentioned earlier, we cannot predict all the unknowns or complexities because we are dealing with complex world. Due to this, the Scrum team makes the commitment to produce a done increment that satisfies the sprint goal rather than specific product backlog items or user stories they decided upon during sprint planning. It's very small, but it has a significant distinction, which means your goal should determine what are the items that you're going to work on in a sprint, and not that you would be working on specific work items or user stories without having a goal in mind. Now, the product owner will work with the developers to decide which product backlog items to drop from the sprint if the things don't go according to the plan. This gives the team the best opportunity of delivering a done increment that satisfies the sprint goal. As I mentioned, if you are in the middle of the sprint and you understand that you're not able to deliver all the work items, so which item should be dropped from the backlog, that is sprint backlog, becomes very difficult if you do not have the sprint goal. Now imagine if you have a sprint goal, then you will work with your product owner to decide which can be deprioritized and which can be kept in the sprint backlog. And for that, your sprint goal will tell you that those items that are satisfying the sprint goal or that are aligning to the sprint goal. Out of that, which is the priority which can be worked upon, and the other items which cannot be completed can be deprioritized. So that's what about the sprint importance of the sprint goal. Now let's talk about the flexible plan. The Scrum team should talk about how they intend to deliver the product backlog items they choose for the sprint during the sprint planning. They don't have to go into every single detail or the minutest detail about each day's activity, but they should have enough of a plan to get started, leaving the remaining details to come to them during the sprint. Which means while you start your sprint planning, you should have enough detail to start your work on. Not necessary that you should have all the details of all the user stories or work items during the sprint planning. The details can be immersed or discovered as you start the work in your sprint. Also, the items that you're going to pick up, that should be kind of a pull system, which means you should have enough work items to work upon and enough details in it to start work on it. And as you finish the work item, you can pull item from your sprint from your product backlog, which is aligning to the goal. Now, in order to reduce the waste that comes with the bottlenecks or dependencies or impediments, planning can also identify any dependencies among Scrum team members and how to address them. For instance, if the sprint is focused on planning a party, just an example, now your goal is to plan for a party, or if your goal is to host a party. Now you're planning in a sprint for, for planning a party. It is necessary to decide who would choose the menu, decide the guest list, and purchase the items. By doing this, duplication is prevented, saving us from having to send 5 people to the shop to purchase the item, isn't it? A little planning will help to make sure the team uses their time well. The team receives insightful input to improve work processes as each team member discusses how they intend to complete the work. Now, in this scenario where you want to plan for a party, now you know that you have these many items that you want to decide upon a menu, decide upon a guest list, decide and go for and purchase an item. If you don't have a tentative plan or maybe a plan, what will happen is all the members would end up going and doing a single item. Maybe it could be purchasing item, or maybe it could be deciding upon a menu. Which what will happen is the work is not getting distributed, and they don't have a clear idea of what each one is doing. For that purpose, planning is important. Now, what we are doing in this is you had this entire big chunk of work of maybe uh, hosting a party, doing these multiple things. And now what we are doing is just an example, pick up one work item of purchasing something, right? Now, one person is appointed or maybe identified to go and purchase items. Now, what he is doing is purchasing item is a big item. Now, he wants to break down into smaller items. So what he is doing is, okay, now he has categorized. I mean, this is up to the developers to imagine and realize or break down. So in this case, our developer is trying to break down his purchasing of items into smaller chunks, right? So now what he does is what he wants to purchase. Maybe he wants to purchase decorative items. That could be one. Second could be purchasing a return gift. Third could be maybe purchasing ingredients for the food. So these could be different things. So obviously he cannot get all the three things from the same shop. So he'll break down the purchase of items into three different smaller work items, and according to the work item he'll go, or according to the item that he wants to purchase, he will plan his work accordingly, that which shop he would go, what is the budget, and all those things. So this way, what the team member is doing is he is breaking down the big chunk of product backlog item into smaller work item, and then they decide on how they are going to work on. Now let's come to the last part of it. Last but very, very important part of it. What is the outcome of sprint? Remember that the outcome of the sprint is sprint backlog. And what does the sprint backlog consist of? Sprint backlog consists of a sprint goal, a plan, and a product backlog items selected for the sprint. As I mentioned, Scrum does not talk about user story. It says product backlog items selected for that sprint. Now let's talk about those things in detail. The only outcomes of sprint planning is sprint backlog, which consists of sprint goal, plan, and product backlog items selected for the sprint. The developers, along with the product owner, crafts the sprint goal before the end of the sprint planning and identifies his product sprint backlog, which means they discuss, they collaborate, they come together, and they start discussing the each work item in detail. And this way, they clarify their doubts, they resolve or maybe highlight any dependencies or any risks or whatever, and they discuss each item in detail and come to the conclusion of crafting a sprint goal. And this happens before your sprint planning ends. Apart from these two things, it does not matter whether they estimate the work or not, whether they have all the details of the work items. They should have enough details to start work on it and have identified a sprint backlog item by the end of the sprint planning. For new Scrum Masters, so this is my tip from for the new Scrum Masters. Whenever you are helping teams implement Scrum, remember that your purpose is of doing Scrum is not getting Scrum right, but to help business grow and serve customer to achieve goals and solve problems. So teach your teams to have their goals solid. Your entire sprinting should be around your product goals and sprint goals. Goals should drive your plans and not vice versa. As I mentioned earlier, you don't have to select your backlog items randomly based on the priority and then start doing the work on it. And how much and what you're going to pick, there is no clue to it, right? You first decide upon the goal. You see what is the product goal, what is your sprint goal, and then your goal should drive your plan and not vice versa. To explain this, I can give you one example. Imagine you are planning for a vacation or a holiday. You decide your destination, that is goal first, and then prepare a plan or an itinerary. Now you decide your destination and you have a plan or itinerary and you're on your road trip. Suddenly, your car gets punctured, or maybe you find a heavy traffic on the road. What you do over here? Do you go back home saying that my plan is not working, or do you change your plan? Of course, in this case, you either fix your car and move ahead or take an alternative route if you find a traffic, isn't it? But you are certain that you want to reach the destination. What are you doing over here? You have your goal intact. This means you still stick to your goal. You have not changed your destination, but you have changed your plan. You are flexible on your plan. Exactly same things you have to teach your Scrum teams as Scrum Masters. Treat your goal as North Star and be flexible with the plan. So remember that the outcome of this sprint is your sprint backlog, and your sprint backlog consists of the sprint goal, plan, and product backlog items. And your product backlog items can be emerging in nature. It's not necessary that you have all the items that you're going to work on in this sprint throughout the sprint. During the time of sprint planning itself, have enough items to start work on it and have enough details in that items, and you can pick the work as you go. But in this process, ensure that you are fixed on your sprint goal. You don't change your sprint goal according to the items. You can change your items according to the sprint goal. So in this case, even if there are some additions that are done in the middle of the sprint, just an example, if the product owner comes and says, you know what, I want this item to be done, which is like highest priority, and I want it to be done in this sprint itself. Now what you do as a scrum master, right? You need to teach your team that what is the sprint goal. Is this item that we are going to bring on, is it aligned to the sprint goal or not? If this is aligned to the sprint goal, then you may ask your developers and the all the developers to see whether they are in a position to pick up this item. If they say yes, then you deprioritize something from the sprint backlog. And when I say you, it's not you as a scrum master, as a team together, a scrum team together. And if it is not aligned to the sprint goal, the new item is not aligned to the sprint goal, then that item is going directly back to the sprint product backlog. This way, your plan becomes flexible. Your items can change, but your goal should not change. So remember that whenever you're doing the sprint planning, you're discussing on these things without fail as a scrum team. With that, I come to the end of the video. I hope you learned something from this video, and I'm looking forward to come up with more such informative videos in future. Thank you so much.